T 89.5 FM. Ooh, we just got a little boost. Sherry DeNovo here, your host, MPP Park Delhi Park. You're listening to Three Women, and we have in studio two phenomenal women. Let me tell you a little bit about them, and then we're going to talk to them. First, we've got Tanya Mello. She is the Ontario representative on the NDP Federal Council. She's an economist, worked in business for Ontario Power Generation and Deloitte Consulting. She holds a master's degree from Princeton University. She served with the UN, working in English, French, and Spanish on 3 continents, working with refugees and displaced persons. And she's in studio, and we're in studio for a particular reason. We're going to talk about the convention. Whoa, some convention. And sitting right across from her is Angela Zhu. She's a female co-chair of the Toronto Area Council of the Provincial NDP. She's a Toronto-based communications strategist, works collaboratively to tailor digital strategies for unions and election campaigns. She serves as the president of her NDP Riding Association in Toronto Centre and was elected female co-chair of the Toronto Area Council of the Provincial NDP. She also appears bi-weekly on the live True North Politics panel with the CTV News channel. So welcome both to Three Women.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so let's start with you, Tanya, because you've got this ridiculous resume. Like, you've done everything, everywhere. So what are you doing now? What are you involved in?
I'm the Director of Diversity and Equity at University of Toronto in Scarborough. So I work with faculty, staff, and students in equity and diversity, 13,000 students on our campus, and I love it.
So welcome to your other campus.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And Angela, what are you up to now?
So I'm currently working at the Labour Community Services up at the Ontario Federation of Labour. It's a partnership between the Labour side and between United Way, trying to do outreach and charity work across the city. And I'm really happy to be doing some communications work with them.
Well, and I hear would like to go to law school, maybe.
Maybe,
if
fingers
the
crossed.
Forces align, that would be good.
Careful. I did it. Careful.
Uh-oh. Well, I'll be hearing back in a month or so we'll find out.
Good luck.
Yeah. So, Tanya, now you ran for the federal NDP in the last election. Talk to me about that. Was this the first time you ran?
It's the first time I ran as a candidate. I've
Right.
worked on many campaigns.
Right.
I can tell you it was both the best experience and most challenging experience of my life. I ran in a community where the NDP generally doesn't have a lot of footing, where Rob Ford was from. And
Etobicoke Lakeshore?
Etobicoke Centre. So he lives in Etobicoke Centre and ran in the north. And it was extremely empowering both to see how much the community was ready for the NDP's message and priorities, as well as how many people we got out to volunteer. We got over 200 people out.
Amazing. Wow. That's astounding. Especially, first campaign. That's incredible. And Angela, you haven't actually run as a candidate, but you have actually worked on campaigns for a lot.
I've worked on quite a lot of campaigns downtown and in Scarborough.
Yeah, and did you work on Linda's McQuaig's campaign in Toronto Centre?
In 2013, I did. Okay. Most recently in this campaign, I managed one in Scarborough for Laura Castleman in Scarborough Guildwood.
And what was that like? How did that go?
Well, it was really amazing to find the kind of volunteers that we got. They were almost all people of color who really wanted to get engaged and really wanted to see what kind of a message that we could bring to Canada because, as a party, we are speaking to issues that really impact immigrants. I mean, I'm a person of color, of course, and so a lot of the volunteers that we got also spoke second languages, third languages, and so on. So that was really inspiring. At the same time, it was pretty frustrating because there is a certain more right-leaning base that we just had difficulty breaking through. And that's kind of a reality in certain ridings in Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Now, both those ridings went Liberal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, we were fighting against a 17-year Liberal incumbent, John McKay, so it was always going to be pretty difficult.
Well, and I can share, my riding is very famous because it felt like I was running against 2 incumbents. It was Opitz against Wisniewski, and this is the Liberal and Conservative that actually went to court in the last election because there was a 23 vote difference. So it felt like I had some heavy hitters to contend with, I can tell you that.
Very much so. How were the all candidates debates in both your ridings? What did those look like? Any excitement, fights, anything?
You know what happened in mine that was really fascinating is that the crowd was very supportive of the points of view that I was putting across, and I think we took the Liberal candidate a little off his game. So I remember one of the things that happened. They were basically fighting against each other quite a bit, and then it started to turn where both of them felt like I was a contender all of a sudden. So that felt very good just to have our message out there. But the debates were ferocious. And I have to say, the Liberal, Conservative, and NDP, we all did well. But also, I was pleased to see the representation of the Green Party as well, strong.
And what about in your riding?
So in Scarborough-Guildwood, where I was working, I was a little frustrated because there was a bit of a sense of an old boys club that I could see. The Liberal candidate had been the incumbent for, as I mentioned, 17 years, but the Conservative opponent had also run many, many, many times. And so they were familiar with each other. And then we also had Kevin Clark, which is well-renowned throughout Toronto. Yeah,
Kevin.
He was running for MP in Scarborough-Guildwood. We actually canvassed his building at one point. It was very interesting to see his handmade signs. They were very crafty, I have to say that. But as a result, I have to say my female candidate got talked over a lot of the time. She had to really fight to get her words in edgewise, and that was frustrating. As somebody who was managing a female candidate in a riding where all the other candidates were male.
Yeah. Actually, on that, I have a Kevin Clark story. By the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Three Women. I've got two incredible women here, both either ran in campaigns for the NDP in the last election and went to convention, which is really the topic of the show. We're going to be talking about the NDP Convention, what happened there, what's happening with the party. If you want to weigh in, we would love to hear from you. It's 416-946-7000, and we're happy to hear your voice. Or you can tweet at me at CheridINOVO, Sherry DeNovo, at Sherry DeNovo. So just tweet at me if you're the shy sort, and I'll make sure your comments or your questions get put into the conversation. So my Kevin Clark story, is during the by-election with Lynn McQuaig and Chrystia Freeland. And it was an incredible debate, really great one. And actually, was it here? It was somewhere on U of T.
It was at St. Mike's. I remember it. I was there.
Do you remember it?
Yes.
And where Kevin Clark came and literally shut the debate down, started screaming and yelling. And I found it incredibly shocking. There was security there, and they did nothing to stop him. He literally overpowered two powerful women and shut the debate down. It was actually incredibly fascistic, if I could say so, because it just shut down all possible conversation, and nobody stopped him. It was really shocking. You were there, Angela. Yeah. You remember it. It was just awful.
He actually, I don't think she was injured, but I remember seeing him push Chrystia Freeland, and that was just the fact that he would use violence on a person. I don't think she was actually injured, but the fact that he did that was really shocking to me.
Not a favorite person of mine, I'll tell you after that. No. Let's get back to both of you went to Edmonton.
We did, yes.
So now you both went as what? Were you there as you were both delegates?
Yes, okay. I went as a delegate from Etobicoke Centre.
From Etobicoke Centre,
yep.
Okay.
And I was a delegate for Toronto Centre.
Okay, and you were also there though involved with unions as well, were you not, Angela?
I wasn't there as a union delegate. I did attend all the Labour caucuses, but I wasn't one of their delegates.
And Tanya, did you attend any of those caucuses?
Yes, I attended quite a few caucuses. The Labour caucuses, I tried to go to the Aboriginal, the first Aboriginal Issues caucus, and then the Ontario caucus that we had.
As well, okay.
I was also there one day early for the youth convention.
Yes, because you're so young. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so I have Spencer Higdon. You probably know Spencer, right? He was there for so he was kind of telling me, he was giving me the blow by blow because I was a talking head on CTV and other media here. So he's going to kind of give me the blow by blow from the floor. But what was your take on the youth convention?
I was really inspired by just how active and organized they all were. Okay. I mean, there were some places where we got contentious. There were motions on the floor where people were hugely in disagreement, but I was just inspired by how active and organized they all were, especially the people from McGill. I have to give them props. They were like a little army, and I thought it was just so exciting to see them get organized that way. And it also served as a great training ground, I think, for young people to understand how Robert's rules worked, because they saw it get used in practice, sometimes for the first time. I think a lot of delegates at the youth convention had never really experienced Robert's rules in a larger setting before. So it gave them a little bit of preparation for when the actual convention started so that they could understand what on earth was going on.
Now, Quebec is well known for its basically socialist stance on a lot of issues. And McGill and Concordia, if I'm not mistaken, came out and basically called for that Mulcair should retire, certainly from leadership, not from his legislative function, and that we're calling for a new direction in the NDP. So how did that sound at the microphone in the youth convention?
You know what? I think that's what really broke down the real discussion. That like every single motion that came up went back to that question. Right at the beginning, there was a motion to take Tom off the agenda, which shocked a lot of us. We said, look, whether you like him or not, he's still the leader. He should address us. That's tradition. So that was very contentious. So right from the get-go, that was an issue. And every time there was a motion, whether it was on climate change or transit or youth issues, it always went back to Tom. And that frustrated me a little bit, because I felt like we should be able to separate the leadership question from all of the other issues.
What were some of the other issues that kind of jumped out at you there that you thought there was interesting policy discussion on?
Sure. So free education is one that always comes up at one of these conventions, right? Most of the youth are in post-secondary education, so that always comes up. We also had some interesting motions just about restructuring definitions. Like the Ontario NDP youth, for instance, put forward a motion to update the definition of LGBTQ, because it doesn't include certain types of identities. For instance, asexual was not included. And so we wanted to make some changes on that. And a lot of people didn't really understand how the definitions worked. So there were quite a lot of explanations that had to happen.
Right. And in your caucus discussions, what were some of the interesting policy debates that came up?
You know,
Tanya.
I know we're going to get to this because it was at the heart of the convention, but I was there when LEAP began. The LEAP manifesto came to the fore, and I think it's an extremely important one. I will say that I think it's a good thing that we as a party decided that we would discuss something. I think a lot of the focus in the media right now has been around, are we adopting the LEAP manifesto? What are the implications? In fact, what the NDP adopted is a decision for districts in the electoral ridings to actually discuss it and discuss how we would move forward and whether or not we would adopt it. And I found that refreshing and also very, very important. One that didn't come up, that I have to say, it came up in a lot of discussions, but it never made it to the main floor, was the equity statement. And for me, this is something that I am very, very attached to.
Tell us about the equity statement. What is
it? The equity statement and the proposition was around looking at ways in which in our membership and in our representation in the NDP, we can actually reflect what's happening on the ground in Canada as a community. So we also already talk about things like having 50% of elected representatives, of representatives that are candidates be women, because 50% of our community is women. But also looking at things like, how do we represent visible minority groups? So if 20% of Canadians are visible minorities, do we see that reflected in our candidates that are going forward? How are Aboriginal people and folks represented, and are the percentages reflective of our communities? How are people with different abilities and disabilities represented? And I loved this notion, because this proposal, because I thought, for me, what it did was really take the NDP core values and say, we need to be living them and reflect them before we go and preach them to the broader community.
Which means a whole lot more work in terms of candidate sourcing and et cetera, and a whole lot more work helping candidates and grooming candidates, which
I think it's essential. And I want to say, I think the NDP does a great job. I think we have a long way to go. And as a woman of color who ran, I can tell you, it is challenging to run against two established white men. It was challenging at the door to have to give the resume you gave about me, Sherry, before people would even listen to me. And those realities exist. So the degree to which the NDP as a party can support females, people of color, females of color. There are a variety of intersections. People who are out in the community as LGBTQ, pansexual, asexual, and say that we acknowledge that this is an identity that may face significant barriers, and we want to make sure those voices and those faces are represented in our government. I think that's a very strong statement from a party and one I hope to see us make.
So did we make it?
We did not.
Okay.
So,
And even just making it, I mean, we may not want to go the quota route, but we, in a sense, should. I mean, if we're working, we do work with that, with women and male candidates. We should be looking at people of color and people of different ethnicities and Aboriginal folk. We should be looking at that in terms of, do we have the right number, the right mix of people running that really reflect Canada?
and you said something that I think is extremely important, Sherry, and I'm sure Angela can speak to this as well. One of the things that's an advantage of making a statement like this, and whether we want to call it quotas or aspirations, is that it forces us to do the work to search. Because what I'm arguing isn't that we have to find them out of thin air, but these talented, extraordinary people exist in our community and they want to serve. And quite often I read that the reason many people don't run is because they're not asked.
Absolutely.
Women don't run because they're not asked. And I'll tell you, it took over 50 people to ask me before I ran. And so thinking about what that means in terms of our role and responsibility to find these extraordinary people and have them have a voice, I think is powerful.
Absolutely. What have you experienced that as well, Angela? You must.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jennifer Hollett has a stat that she likes to mention, which is that the average man has to be asked 3 or 4 times to run. The average woman, about 10 or 15. And Tanya, you just mentioned, 50? So it's a little bit like the wage gap, right? You know, white men versus white women. But when you bring in women of color, the number is even lower. We're not 77 cents on the dollar for people of color women. It's
Much lower.
Yeah, something in the 50s last I checked, right? So that's exactly the case. And our our party needs to be doing a better job on that search. And we exist. Tanya, you existed, but why didn't we find you earlier, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was asked to run, and I think most candidates never thought, I mean, especially most women candidates, just it's not the first thing they think about. I was always a social justice activist, as are you, but you never think about it, right? It's just not something on your radar until somebody brings it up, and then you think. But I mean, you need so much more than that too, of course, because, hey, we've got the Agnes MacPhail Fund for women to help finance some of this, because elections cost money, as we all know. We should be doing the same thing, of course, for people of color. I mean, that's another aspect of the equity statement that should be looking at, is the money.
And that's a huge one. Feeling support in terms of networks and mentorship is one thing, but anybody who's run a campaign will tell you you need money to get started. Right?
Absolutely.
So thinking about those barriers to access.
And again, 946-7000, that's a 416 a number if you want to phone in and weigh in. Thanks for your tweets already, retweeting, just all nice things. But if you want to actually make comment, weigh in on the decisions made at convention, what you saw in the media since the convention, all of that. Let's go back to the campaigns before we get to convention. We're working our way sort of around it and into it. But my experience in our riding in Parkdale High Park was, of course, I was working for Peggy Nash. And honestly, in the first, and this was a horrendously long campaign, as we all know, in the first many weeks, we had more volunteers, more signs, more money, more marks, that is to say, more identified voters than in any of the campaigns I've ever worked on over the last 10 years. I worked on a bunch in our riding. And if you had gone out in those first 4 or 5 weeks, you would have thought, this is a landslide. This isn't even going to be a contest. And then all of a sudden, the last couple of weeks shifted. What do you think brought about that shift? Angela?
Well, I think that it wasn't even the last couple weeks. It was the final week. I mean, most of our candidates won in the advanced polls. Actually, like, I know Peggy did, I know Craig Scott did, I know so many of our leading candidates actually did well, even 6 or 7 days before the election. And it was just that final little push for strategic voting. I really think that strategic voting had a major impact on what went wrong.
But why didn't it go in our direction? I mean, the strategic vote, we were running at 41% in the polls, and because we did so well in the advanced polls, so there was this kind of momentum that, there was that point in the campaign where it looked like, what ministry will you be the cabinet minister of, right? I mean, it really did. And you're running at around 41%, and then went bang. And whether a week or 2 weeks out, I mean, it was shifting, right? It was shifting. So the strategic vote was not ours, because we use that in our literature too. We are the strategic vote. Why do you think that wasn't the thing that got us there?
So I'd say two things for me, and I was surprised that we didn't discuss this as much as I had hoped at the convention. I think we need to talk about the niqab issue. So I think the strategic vote for me was based on the fact that we lost Quebec. And when there was a sense
But the Liberals had the same position.
They did, but that's going to be my second point. So my first point is the NDP was seen to have lost Quebec. And when we lost Quebec, there was a belief that it was possible that the Conservatives win, a minority or even a majority. And when you look at the fact that they got almost 100 seats, I mean, they did very, very well. And so the strategic vote was actually strategic. The question is, why did we lose Quebec? And I think there are two reasons. The first is the niqab issue actually was very powerful in Quebec. I think as a party in Quebec, we need to talk about why. That is something we need to deal with, is Islamophobia and racism. Yep. I think that's absolutely... I mean, the Prime Minister deciding what a woman can wear in a citizenship ceremony is like the Prime Minister telling me when I can eat Timbits on a Sunday. It's not in his jurisdiction. He has no authority. It's actually a ludicrous wedge issue that had nothing to do with politics, but it worked because Islamophobia is rampant. The second thing is what you said is, why was it that the Liberals had the same stance as we did on the niqab, and yet we bore the brunt? And I think we have to talk about the fact that the way in which we're perceived in the media and the way in which the polls went had a massive effect. The number of people that told me, I'm going to vote based on what I read in the paper the day of the election, was high for me. I was surprised. And the reality was, if you look at the media sort of reporting, I think there was a bias towards the Liberals.
Oh, there's always a bias towards the Liberals.
A very strong bias.
But the mainstream media, we have to say, we don't have The Guardian in Canada. We don't have a left-wing Labour paper. We don't have such a thing. Mm-hmm. We never have. But Jack, to contrast it with Jack, I mean, Jack, same thing. Nobody predicted Jack's win, and everybody was... and good grief, in that campaign, if you remember, halfway through that campaign, we were like 13% in the polls. Like it actually was the reverse. We were like running in third, and then all of a sudden surged at the end. And the same with the Liberals, running in third, surged at the end. What was the difference between that campaign and this campaign? Because other than, again, we had the same position as the Liberals and the niqab. What about I was sitting in Newstalk 1010 all night watching these returns. Part of me thought, as soon as I started seeing the East Coast, even before it got to Quebec, with the time change, and you're seeing this wave of red. Now, it begs the question, it started, why the wave of red? Megan Leslie lost her seat. Who would ever have thought that, right? Wave of red happened. But then that, of course, I think has an influence on the way the rest of the country then is also watching the returns says, oops, strategic vote in my head just shifted. I'm going to get out and vote or whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. I would also say one of the differences is, and this is something that we struggle with as a party, is many Canadians started to wonder which party was which, that they saw the Liberals and the NDP as indistinguishable. And so in the last election, they thought, let us try the NDP because we want the Conservatives out, and that we won that wave. And this time, I think in part for the reasons I've stated.
Girl, you're singing my song now.
Yeah. I hate to say it, and it's something that is a massive struggle, is that we have to decide as a party what we stand for, because quite frankly, whatever we said, the Liberals would just go a little bit further to the left. And many people I know that would consider themselves very progressive said, I can't tell the difference between your parties anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's what I was hearing at the doors all of the time. Like, more than any other question, people would say, so tell me, what's the difference between you guys and the Liberals? And that would, I've never had to canvass on that question before. We don't have lit on, here's why we're a distinct party. To me, it was ridiculous. And the fact that our party didn't really do a good job of messaging, I think...
Say more on that. What should we have messaged?
Well, a lot of our messaging was stuck on this balanced budget thing, which I think a lot of people disagreed with. In the aftermath at debriefs, I know that there were people even within the party who disagreed with it. And frankly, it just didn't resonate well. A lot of people expected us to be the tax and spend party, which is often touted as a insult or as a criticism. But in this case, if even the Liberals were going to tax and spend more than us, we should have been pushing that envelope more. We could have at least matched them, not gone in the other direction. People say that the Liberals were further left than us. I disagree with that as far as policy. I mean, we were promising a really great pharmacare program, childcare program. These are things that we were better than on the Liberals. We were better on pipelines. This is just fact. But as far as we were presented when it came to the balanced budget thing, which is all anybody really heard, we sounded like we were not as far left.
Gerald
And that's
Butts,
a problem.
a Liberal strategist that everybody knows now, lives in my riding, another constituent, and I saw him quoted in the press as saying it, when I heard about the balanced budget, I knew we had him. That was his immediate reaction to that.
Wow.
Tanya, weigh in.
I think that's part of it, but I actually have to say, in terms of Liberal strategy, it wasn't that we were confusing because we were completely unclear on our policies. It was that I think they realized, as they did in the provincial election, if we just use that platform, people will find us indistinguishable. So I felt we came first when we talked about daycare. We came first in terms of our commitment to refugees. And then what would happen is the Liberals would follow suit and say, we're going to do the same thing. And that way it becomes very difficult to distinguish the parties. But I don't think it was so much that we were completely unclear about our policies. It's that they matched us. And what was frustrating for me was what I had to say is, let's look at the track record. Even if it were true that we're both touting the same thing, both parties, what have you seen the Liberals do to respond to these policies when they're actually governing with a majority? And what have you seen the NDP do when they're governing with these policies? And so sometimes I find that can be quite challenging to do because you don't have an hour at every door.
Yeah, and of course there's the new young cute leader who has the name.
The heir apparent.
So you don't exactly. So you assume that he's going to break with the Paul Martins and the Jean Chrétiens and things, that he's going to be some new force out there. So people give him a break, I think, in that regard of not following through. So the balanced budget, I mean, quite frankly, if we had won and tried to balance the budget this year, we would be bringing in the most heinous austerity budget ever seen in this country. And I think voters picked up on that, and they knew that we had to spend some money now because we've been so tight for so long. What do you think, Angela?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the bad use of the messaging. I mean, balanced budgets is possible, and it's not inherently bad in the sense of it being austerity. The fact is, we were going to be raising corporate taxes, right? And we were going to be closing tax loopholes on the wealthy. This was going to be the source of the revenue that was going to pay for all our extra spending. It's how we presented it. We were still going to spend a lot of money investing in public transit and, social housing and so on. So it wasn't.
But we wouldn't have had that money with a balanced budget. I mean, the problem with the the Liberals really did get us on the wealth tax too. I mean, we talk about corporate taxes, but not individual wealth taxes. We drew back from that.
Sure.
So that was a bit of a problem too. And the modest increase in the corporate tax from 15 to 17% wouldn't have paid for a lot. If you look at social democratic countries like Germany, most of the social democratic countries in Western Europe have corporate tax rates almost double ours.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, double ours. And somehow, hey, they're economic powerhouses. So, I mean, the right-wing argument about that just doesn't fly. Go on,
But
Tanya.
you've actually said something that I think is important. Very often I find now politically we're comparing ourselves to the U.S. And I think for a lot of things, especially when we're thinking about a social democracy, people don't realize when you're looking at social democracy, what we're talking about is schools. We're talking about firefighters. We're talking about postal service. These are all services that are part of a social democracy. And I think it's actually to our peril that we continuously set the bar as the U.S. Because I would say if you look at indicators around education and health, very, very important things that are at the foundation of a society, the U.S. does not rank very highly. What we need to be looking at is our European counterparts that have both been leaders in these fields, but are also showing ways in which you can actually have a strong economy and extremely strong social programs. What I always argue is I started as an economist. And the thing I learned very, very quickly is it is very hard to justify social spending if your economy is not strong. But at the same time, you cannot have a strong economy if you don't have social spending. We need these programs to actually encourage and help people to achieve their potential.
Yeah,
and
I
so
mean,
that's what we forget.
Childcare in Quebec is a perfect example of
Perfect
that.
example.
Cost a
Absolutely.
lot of money to put into place. $7 a day childcare. Wouldn't we love it in Ontario? But I mean, now it's paying for itself because women go back to work and they pay taxes. So you have to invest. Just, you know what was bizarre to me is this is business 101.
Right.
Like nobody starts a business thinking I'm going to make money right away and the books are going to balance like day one. No, you invest and there's a lag time and you see return. I mean, that's classic. We're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to have a little musical tune. Our wonderful tech Mike is going to play for us, and then we're going to come back. And of course, thank you for your tweets. If you want to phone too, 416-946-7000.
getting my own way through my own day. And all I dare say is it's my own. I got my own seeds, I got my own weeds, I got my own harvest that I've sown. Now I can tell you things I've done, and I can sing you songs I've sung. But there's one thing I can't give, I alone can live. The years I've known and the life I've grown, I got a way I'm going, and it's my way. I got my own stakes in my own game. I got my own name, and it's my way. I got my own wrong, I got my own right, I got my own fight, and it's my way. I got my own peace, I got my own wrath, I got my own path that only I can go. I got my own sword in my own hand, I got my own plan that only I can know. Don't be sad, don't be crying, your day'll come, your day alone. Years you'll know, and a life you'll grow. You got a way to go, and it's all on your own. I got my own world, I got my own life, I got my own strife, and it's my way. I got my own kith, I got my own kin, I got my own sin, and it's my way. I got my own prayers, I got my own fears, I got my own tears, and it's my way. I got my own joy, I got my own load, I got my own road, and it's my way. The years I've known, and the life I'm growing, I got a way I learn, and it's my way. Don't be crying, don't be sighing, your day will come, your day all alone. Put down a story of what I've known, you're bound for glory, all on your own. Put down a story of what I say, you're bound for glory, all on your own one day.
Right here, right now. Every day, CIUT 89.5, the sound of your city. Toronto.
And yes, we're back, and that was Buffy St. Marie. I don't even love her. I mean, how old is she now? She must be like 90, and she still sounds great singing It's My Way. And of course, in the studio, we have two phenomenal young women, Tanya de Mello and Angela Zhu, both, really the heart and soul of our party in the NDP. And we're talking about the NDP Convention. We will get there, we promise you. You can have your say too. Either tweet me at CHERIDINOVO, Sherry DeNovo, your host at MPP Parkdale High Park, or you can phone in 416-946-7000. So Bernie Saunders, Jeremy Corbyn. We have some pretty good international examples, especially with Bernie Saunders, who gets cut out of his media pretty routinely too, but ran this real grassroots campaign, not afraid to call himself a democratic socialist, not for one moment as our Bernie. And neither was Jeremy Corbyn. Seemed to take the reins at the Labour Party. I just watched him grilling David Cameron about the Panama Papers was fun on TV. So we have these international examples. And we'll talk to that. We've got a caller, so we'll take the caller first and we'll get back. Think about it. Stew on that, women. Who am I speaking to?
Oh, hi. My name is Larry.
Hi, Larry. Welcome to Three Women.
Yeah, I enjoy it every week.
Oh, thank you. And what do you think? The NDP Convention, what do you think?
Well, what I wanted to comment on was the LEAP proposition.
Yeah.
And how do you sell it when the person that puts it forward went to Upper Canada College, and also Linda McQuaig, Naomi Klein, they're like international jet setters. And it looks to me like they're going to have fuel, but someone that wants to, working person that wants to take their family, perhaps for a Sunday drive, they won't be able to.
Okay, Larry, that's a good point. And it's one that was made at the convention. So you know what? Let me shift now to the women. They're going to take this on. Thanks, Larry. First of all, I do want to contest, though. I mean, I think Linda McQuaig, Avi Lewis, and Naomi Klein would defer from calling themselves international jet setters. I would be surprised if Avi Lewis went to Upper Canada, but I could be corrected on that. I don't know. But really, they get by like the rest of us, them on book sales that are not as good as you would think they are. And Linda McQuaig, the journalism just doesn't pay what it used to. So anyway, not so far from the working class as you would think. But Larry makes a point, and it was a point that we heard in Alberta from the Alberta Federation of Labor. Is LEAP something dreamed up in the ivory towers by the, intelligentsia and the jet setters in downtown Toronto? What do you think, Tanya?
So I think for me, it's very important to get away from looking at potentially personal attacks of the people that have created it. And what I always try to do is look at the idea and where it's trying to get us. And I think what's important about the LEAP manifesto is not saying, could the people that actually created it be criticized or, I guess what I'm trying to say here is what I think is important is that the LEAP manifesto is asking all of us how we're going to react to climate change. And I think that Avi, Naomi, Linda will all agree that they themselves are going to have to make changes in their lives, as will I. I am somebody that flies to visit friends and family. And it's something that I love to do, but it's also something that I realize has an impact, and my carbon footprint has an impact. What they're saying is, what we need to decide is not how this is going to affect our daily drive, but how this will affect our everyday lives if we do nothing. So there's something in between, you can never fly again, or I can never take a Sunday drive, to what happens to us as a community if the temperature rises 2%? What is that going to mean for all of the people in my riding in Etobicoke whose houses were flooded, and their entire life savings are wrapped up in those houses? How do we deal with the fact that kids can't be out for more than 20 minutes without sunscreen? And those are the kinds of questions that I want to focus on, because they are massive questions that affect every single person, including Avi, Naomi, and Linda every single day.
Angela, weigh in.
Yeah, of course. So I really think that this kind of goes back to what we say during campaigns. Why are you criticizing the person? Criticize their ideas, right? Now, if you disagree with the ideas, that's the discussion we should be having. Where the ideas came from, I don't really think is as important, because they're the same people who have been touting the same ideas that we have. It's not anything different. Now, on these ideas, as Tanya says, every single one of us is going to be impacted. As a young woman, I'm actually 23 years old myself. I have this, I would say, somewhat unique perspective, because I'm going to be one of the ones inheriting whatever the current generation leaves behind. Now, if we completely destroy the environment in the next 15, 20 years, well, my children are going to be the ones that are going to have to deal with that. I will still be alive to see that. Hopefully, many of you still will be, many of you listeners. But I know for a fact that my generation will be. And I know that a lot of youth are feeling the same thing. That's why youth are increasingly getting involved on climate change.
And the planet is warming up faster than predicted, and we're looking at island nations being wiped off the map. We're looking at extreme weather in a number of places, way more than normal. So really,
I mean, it was snowing 10 days ago, and now this weekend I almost got a sunburn.
I know. Avi said, I think in one of his rebuttals to all of this, the hype that came out, mostly from conservatives, after the convention, was that the climate proposals in the LEAP manifesto are actually the least radical aspect of the document. It's interesting. Anyway, we are voted to discuss it, not to pass it, and that has to be put out there as well. And that's a very good thing. Let's get back to leadership, because that was the other big theme at the convention. And by the way, phone's still working, 416-946-7000. And thank you for keeping on tweeting about how much you like the show. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn. We have examples of two men call themselves democratic socialists, shoot from the hip, absolutely, say what I think a lot of our rank and file in the NDP would say, yeah, that's right. And I even posted today this lovely thing, Jews for Bernie, that came out in New York City that said, roses are red, violets are blue. It's time to elect a socialist Jew. Gotta love it, right? Only New Yorkers would have that sign up. So what about us?
I think that these people have made it a lot easier for those of us who identify, as progressives or even socialists to actually out ourselves and say that, right? Socialist was becoming a little bit more accepted in Canada, but certainly in the US it was taboo, right? You're a socialist? My gosh, it was shocking. Well, they've made that a little bit more acceptable in modern discourse, and I think that that's really opened up the discussion. It's really made it more possible for people to talk about the ideas and talk about how firefighters and postal service and hospitals and schools and roads and all of these things that everybody needs at some point are actually socialist ideas and socialist principles. And it's okay to be a socialist. And it makes me really happy to be able to say that. It's
amazing in the United States. I mean, it was the most searched word in the online Webster Dictionary in the States. Tanya.
So what I think Bernie represents is something that people have been feeling for a long time, and he is now articulating it in a way that is mobilizing people to act. And I think what's happened is he's changed the dialogue around what is fair. So revealing realities, like we seem to get hung up on how people spend $5.50 of their welfare check, but we're not worried about millions of dollars that are being hidden away in tax havens by corporations. And we seem to accept that as a counter, an effect of capitalism. And we're talking about a community that sees in the US an inequality every day widening and widening. Whereas Bernie says it, people are working 40 hours a week and they can't afford basic rent and food. And people see that across the board as completely unjust. And what I think is important about that is regardless of whether he wins, he has changed the dialogue and he has forced all candidates to address this inequality that is actually crippling American society. And we're starting to see that in Canada. One of the things I remember during Barack Obama's time, I worked for Barack Obama's campaign, was people had started to feel that the Occupy movement that was out at that time was a big failure. What people didn't realize was Barack Obama was starting to talk about inequality then. And I think we have to credit those Occupy members for bringing that conversation to the table.
And Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter
Idle
has been
No More,
huge.
these incredible social movements that seem to exist and then sort of peter out, but they haven't really. They've really affected everything.
They've actually affected the fact that we cannot ignore issues that are affecting Black lives, Aboriginal people, people that are not always at the table every single day.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, I almost feel like it's sort of a second outing of myself or something. I get to say I'm a socialist now. Wow, always was, but I get to say it now. Yay! But one of the things that I think is in terms of the climate justice and the climate crisis that's so critical when we look at social systems is that any system that has to grow by 10% every year to satisfy shareholders, or at least 3% or 4%, and that growth is predicated on using resources, which, let's face it, a lot of multinationals and companies ain't going to be good for the climate. It's just not. I mean, we have to be able to look at sustainability all of a sudden, and that's particularly important for us as a resource country. So what do you think that the Bernies and the Jeremys had? Did you feel that impact when you were in Edmonton at the NDP convention? Angela?
So a few of us had a bit of a drinking game. I hope I'm allowed to admit that.
Of course.
We didn't actually involve alcohol until, after the adjournment. Then we would rally up and then get on it. But the idea was we would count how many times Bernie Sanders' name or Jeremy Corbyn's name got brought up. And, we'd have like a little notebook where we were tallying, and at the end of the day, the number was always ridiculously high because people would go up to the mics and reference them every single time. It was kind of hilarious. And I think that goes to show that our party is feeling inspired by that. And it's feeling more inspired by what's going on in other countries than what's going on here. So I think that speaks to what our party needs to look at in our rebuilding efforts. I mean, we are facing a little bit of an identity issue where we need to figure out what our party actually stands for at this point. And if so many people are feeling inspired by the socialism and the grassroots and, all that kind of stuff that Bernie and Corbyn are espousing, maybe we need to look at that model here in Canada for the NDP.
And Tanya, you weren't lining up shots, I imagine.
No,
but
I don't
what
drink.
What did you think?
That's fine. You're allowed to drink. I don't have to drink. So I actually think, for me, it represents something different. I don't see this as a new surge. Bernie's been around for a long time. What I saw that I think is fascinating, that I think we need to galvanize on, is that most people feel that you should have a fair shake if you're working hard and doing your best. That's what I saw at the doors. A lot of people said you can never win out in Etobicoke. That is an area that the NDP will never win. And in fact, when I went to the doors, what I found was many people were very aligned with their principles, and they were saying, if I thought you could win, I'd vote for you because I believe in what you're selling. And so what I've seen with Bernie is really an ability to communicate those ideas in a way that people can digest. And I think that's what we have to figure out. I don't think Canadians aren't buying what we're selling. I don't think Canadians don't think it's important to have strong education for everyone, to have rights for people from different identities. I think what it is this concern, and it comes from this strategic voting and the first past the post system, which is literally killing our democracy in my mind, to believe we can win. Because they're very supportive. I mean, we had over 800 signs in a place that we've only had 4 or 5. I don't believe that everything's changed in the last election. That's not possible. It's that people felt that they could put those signs out because we were galvanizing and people were starting to believe we could win. And we need that message to be stronger.
Yeah. But hey, I mean, first past the post, I mean, it doesn't get more rigid a system than in the United States. I mean, that, you know, like that Bernie has made inroads with, super PACs and super delegates and the kind of systems that their entrenched two-party system has been kind of dealing with for all of history is nothing short of astounding. I mean, we think of free tuition, but free tuition down there means, $100,000 for a BA. I mean, we're talking about significant amounts of money. So
But the biggest block he is facing is people saying, I love him, but he can't win. I love him, but I have, right? And so we have to think about what that means to mobilize people to say, do you want to vote for the least worst party, or do you want to vote for the party you believe in? Right. That's the shift we need.
Yeah. Yeah, and that definitely is about the message, which I contend they didn't hear out of our last campaign. They just didn't hear it. I was actually, because I was a talking head on CTV during the convention, I actually was astounded when the vote came in, both for LEAP, which even though it was just to consider it, I thought that 60% was something. And I thought going in, and of course I was very outspoken about it, very pro-LEAP, and thought that we needed a change in leadership. I don't really know why. And I listen, nothing against the guy. After Peggy dropped out of the leadership race, I supported Mulcair. I was one of them. Think he's a brilliant man, no problems there. The problem was the results of that election. And I actually felt sorry for him. I thought he should have resigned after the election. I don't think he should have put himself or the party through what happened in that convention. But it happened, and I was astounded at that. I have never seen something like that happen in the grassroots on the floor. So I prefer to see those results as positive in the sense that we're moving forward. It wasn't a slap upside the head to him. What it was a regalvanizing of the direction of the party. How did you see it, Angela?
Yeah, similarly, I was shocked. I remember looking around, and because it was first announced in French, I was second guessing. I was like, did I just misunderstand the French? Am I that sloppy? But no, it was actually that 52, which was incredibly low. And just like you, Sherry, I felt very bad for him. I I didn't feel like we needed to do it that way. I of course also voted for renewal, much like you would have, by the sounds of it. But I didn't expect the number to be that low. And I guess what it comes down to is there's a nice way to lay someone off, and then there's a rude way of firing them. And what we did as a party was essentially throw him out the door, And that was...
How else could we have done it, though? This was a vote. It was how else is democracy in action? And it's, like
So,
Tanya didn't
it
wasn't fun for her to lose her.
Listen, I didn't just lose. I got decimated. So I would disagree with you, Angela. I actually think we need to start distinguishing at every level, both as voters that are going to the booth and as candidates that are running and as a party, what it is to like someone versus what it is to think they should be leader, what it is to think that they should win. Those are three different things. And so some people were voting on, I like that guy, I don't like that guy. I want to have a beer with him, I don't. Some people were voting on, do I think he's leading the party in the direction I think we should be going? And some people were voting on whether or not they think he could win the next election. And all three of those are things we have to consider, and I think we conflate them. I think people feel like if I don't think we can win, by definition, I don't like that guy. And I think that that's a really dangerous way. And as somebody who's a candidate and somebody I know Sherry's run, gosh, it feels very awful because people love a winner. And so before you know it, people that told me, I think Tom is the strongest leader in my community, and I think, Trudeau isn't as strong. Once Trudeau won, they changed their tune very quickly. And I think we have to be careful as a party about talking about whether or not we like Tom versus whether we think he's the right leader right now.
I mean, that it seems to me that any other organization with that kind of results would be looking at leadership change. I mean, in any field, just
right.
about. I mean, I can't imagine a field where you wouldn't be looking at that. So we've only got a few minutes left. I feel lots of love and optimism, just to quote Jack, looking forward. What do you think? What's going to happen? Who's going to throw their hat in the ring? What do you think? I mean, this is speculation that media always throws at me, so I'm going to throw it at you because, hey, what do you think? Angela?
Sure. I've already participated in so many discussions about this because everyone seems to want to talk about this. I've just been really inspired by how many of the names thrown about so far have already been women, right? Nikki Ashton's the most obvious one. She's a prominent woman, a bright, rising star. Megan Leslie was another one that was thrown around, although she's since said that she's not
going to.
But hey, we can hold out hope. And then there have also been a couple other names that I've seen. People of color, like people suggested Jagmeet Singh. I don't know if he'll make that jump from provincial to federal, but there's that name. I've also seen Alexandre Boudouris increasing his social media presence, so I don't know if that signals anything, but it could hint something.
I'm sure it does.
I suspect it does. I mean, he followed me right after the convention. I saw him following a whole lot of other people too, so... So yeah, these are some names, and then there's also names like A.V. Lewis, but I don't think that's realistic. He's said no so many times. Yeah. What about you, Tanya?
He hasn't really said no.
No, he hasn't. He
has not said no.
Yes.
And in fact, I and Peter Tabbins held a LEAP Manifesto town hall with, Avi. We were hoping to get Naomi. Turns out we didn't need her because there was almost 600 people that showed up to that town hall. We were astounded at the numbers, that shows the environmental sensibility of downtown Toronto. That's what that shows, because they weren't all NDPers. They were progressives. Right. They were activists. They were there because they rang with an environmental policy. What do you think, Tanya?
I heard one of the things that I hope people caught on Twitter was Rebecca Blakey, our former president of Federal Council, gave a speech that brought me to my knees. I felt it was very powerful, very honest, and it's a name that I've also heard. Mm-hmm. For me, it's been less around which names I've heard. They've all been similar. I know Nathan Cullen is a name that I've heard as well, who ran against Mulcair. What I'm hoping is that we think of as a party not just who the leader is as a figure, but what policies we're going to bring forward. Yeah. I think one of the things that came out of convention for me is, Jennifer Hollett said this. She was worried it was going to be a funeral, but it was more like an Irish wake. So we are sad, we are struggling, but I think the media already has jumped to say, do we think the NDP is obsolete? And in fact, we have more seats now than the Liberals had in the last election.
Well, I mean, and the media has always said that.
Right.
After
Like, we're obsolete. Anything we
we're
do,
always obsolete. We're always.
they're
The
just
question
waiting
is
for us
never
to die, right?
And it is
We're
true,
going to
we
die.
have
The
a-
only question is when. Right. So yeah.
And so I think what we need to be thinking about as a party is what are the policies and platforms that we are going to run on and we're going to distinguish ourselves versus the names. What I hope to see is people of color. What I hope to see is women. You know, I have to say, when I look at the leadership in our country, it is 2016, you know.
Yeah.
You know, our prime minister said because it's 2015, it's 2016, and I'd like to see those names out there.
So what about you, Tanya?
You will laugh, but people have been asking me if I would consider the leadership, and I have no answer at this current phase.
That's a
Which
very
is-
political answer
Which
from
is the
you.
best
If
answer.
I've learned one thing.
Which is the best answer to give because they keep asking that, right? I keep saying I've been asked to, and I always say no, and that kind of and I realize now that's probably wasn't the right answer, even if I meant it, because then they just okay, on to the next, right?
Well, if I run, I'll say that you were one of the first people that asked.
That's right. That's right. So, yes, looking for policies. What I mean, okay, so we heard about childcare. That's not going to go anywhere because we sure need childcare. Pharmacare for sure. Free tuition. You know, another one. Anything else? I mean, obviously, we've got to make some decisions around climate change and what we're going to advocate for there. Anything else?
I've had a couple discussions with people who suggest that because the Liberals are already not too shabby on social issues, and I'll give them that credit. They are not too shabby. The only way for us to really differentiate ourselves is through economic policy. And that means maybe more urban infrastructure. I really want to see a leadership candidate bring to the table some better proposals on what we can do about public transit funding, social housing funding, stuff like that. We passed a motion at convention about safe injection, harm reduction, right? That kind of stuff. That needs to be, I think, more, more pronounced. Just the economic side of things is going to be our way of really differentiating ourselves and making sure
Let's talk to the economists. What about
That's exactly what I was going to say. So
what
we're on
about
the same
revenue
page.
streams?
Yeah, I think we need to think about how we grow jobs, and I think a lot of the people that look to the NDP for social policies are also looking to the NDP for ways in which we can grow the economy for people that aren't at the highest levels of the income scale. And so when you have, people that are single parents looking at the jobs, when we see the manufacturing industry be decimated over the last decades, we need to think about not only how we
And how
build
do we do
infrastructure.
that?
For me, I think there's three major things. I think it's ways in which we bridge immigrants that are great assets to our economy. And I want to say this, and I want to be clear about it. Not just saying that we need to bridge immigrants because they can help us grow our economy, but because everybody deserves the dignity of having a job. It's not just that they're economic units, but they deserve that dignity. We have a huge immigrant talent pool, a lot of doctors driving taxis that I would like to see working in their fields. Ways in which we look at how we've structured our workforce so that people who have parenting obligations, but not just parenting of their children, but people like me who are now in a sandwich generation where we're going to have needs from our parents who are living in and have needs and challenges. How do we change our workforce so that people can help their families and still work, potentially working from home, working in different structures of reporting? And I think
this
that's
is-
something the NDP could bring because we have that social lens.
Which, again, this is something, greening the economy could really help with, because if you look at Germany or social democratic countries, you're looking at where, for example, in Germany, they've got a third of their energy comes from wind power. These are labor-intensive fields. Very, very different. I mean, there's lots of jobs in that area for sure. I mean, that would help because we have to look at how we create those jobs too. What about revenue streams? I'm all for let's find out where they're hiding their money and let's get it back here and working for us.
Well,
What do you think?
there's a great example that Linda McQuaig wrote about in a recent Star article that was published. Norway has a similar initial funding stream of all the pipelines that they had, right? But they took the revenues from that and diversified it. They took that money and they invested in other sectors and other forms of alternative energy. And now they're sitting on, like $1 billion of extra heritage funding? It's ridiculous. we made the mistake of not diversifying. We put all our eggs in one basket in Alberta in the pipelines, and then when the cost of oil fell, everything in our economy fell.
Lost tens of thousands of jobs.
Exactly. But it's not too late for us to start diversifying. We can move away from, being so heavily dependent on pipelines and invest in all these wind jobs that you've suggested, but solar as well is an option. Hydro is great in certain provinces, etc.
And I think there is a lot of work in infrastructure development. One thing I have to laud Mayor Nenshi for is he took a lot of the money from those kinds of revenue streams to build up the infrastructure of Calgary. And so I think he's done that exceedingly well. But I think we really need to look at ways in which we can train our people so they themselves are more adaptable as the economy changes, right? That is a massive way in which the government can educate a population to respond to these shocks and stresses in our economy.
Yeah. Shockingly, infrastructure dollars for transit, for example, from the new Liberal government's only $1.5 billion, which sounds like a lot of money. Ain't nothing. Like that's for all of Ontario. We're not going to see. We're going to be waiting for the bus for a while with that kind of infrastructure.
I've heard that we have the second highest commuter rates in North America in Toronto. Yeah. And I find that just appalling.
44,000 a day on the Dufferin bus. That's all I know. Okay, last word. We got 1 minute left. Are you hopeful about the future, Angela?
Oh, of course. I mean, the energy at the convention. I was going in there expecting doom and gloom, but no, everyone was so energetic, so pumped. All these activists trying to get in touch with one another and build. I felt great energy there, and I think that we have a lot